Hey there. So we're going to continue along with the modeling of the axe now. In the first video, I covered the handle going from the rings down the bottom all the way up through the top. And with this video, we're going to continue along. We're going to continue into the blade section here. There are 5 elements of the blade that need to be modeled. There is the main gray body of the blade. There is the golden filigree pattern here that appears in the center box. This Celtic knot that appears on the blade itself, a braided piece of rope, and a candelabra looking thing here that also tiles along the inside of the blade. So those are the 5 different components, and I'm going to make these all spline based, and we're going to be using splines in different ways. So I've got the handle hidden here for now. I don't really need it for the time being. We'll unhide it when it is required. So first, I'll go and create a line. I'll use a rectangular spline for this, and I'll just go and draw it out here along the shape. Before I do anything, I am going to, convert this to an editable spline and affect my pivot point here with the snaps turned on, making sure that the pivot point for this thing, try that again, making sure the pivot point for this thing is in the central bottom corner. I can turn my snaps off and turn on my type in transform, where I'm just going to set this up to be 0 and X, 0 and Y. I know the image is a little off, but I want to make sure that my geometry is not. So the next thing I'm going to do is just go and align my vertices here to where the corners of this mesh are. This is going to ensure that I end up with the correct shape. I'll then go and select all of my points, and I will right-click, make sure that they are set to Bezier corner, and then I will go in and adjust my curves on these tangents in order to reproduce the shape of the blade. Now, I don't need to change the bottom one or this one or really this one. The only change that I would make to this one is to maybe bring it in a little bit. The only changes I want to really make are going to be to this line here. So there's about the size of that thing. With this done, I'll place an extrude modifier, and I'll give an extrusion now to help me find the dimensions of the base. Now for this, I will bring the handle back so that I can see where it is. And you can see we're going to have some adjustments here that we're going to have to make all this stuff fit together. Again, they've got geometry kind of, or pieces going in and out of each other here, which I'm going to correct and make it so that they don't line up in such a way. So first, this is at the central point here, which is good, and I'm going to go give it some thickness until it's lined up. Let's try this. Yeah, not so bad. I'll convert that to an editable polygon, and then delete the polygons that I won't need. These specifically are the ones that are going to be along the axis of symmetry. So with those gone, I can go into X-ray mode and begin cutting in the blade. Now, when I do this, I'll turn my vertices on here. This is going to allow me to pair up each of my vertices with a counterpart on the outside curve of the blade, ensuring that when the time comes, I have the ability to make quadded geo. And I'm going to place a second vert here where there isn't one for now, ensuring that I have the ability to create this little bevel that exists here. So I'm just going to go move this vert in here as well. I can see that there's a second vertex back here that is not playing nice. Again, just because of that thickness that's there, I can even go and delete all of that and place it again afterwards. Like so. Now I'm going to go in, add, using my connect tool and my vertices, essentially pairing these things off to get rid of this large n-gon here we have around the perimeter, something like that. I do have an extra edge here that I'm going to need to create, so I'll just connect these 2 vertices and pull this vertex up along the curvature a little bit more, and I can connect that. Not so bad. There is a second curve point that's going to need to be in here. Only before I do that, I'll ensure that I've created the thickness of the blade. So here I'm just going to hold shift and extrude these in. I know that they need to be at 0Y. I'll go to my vertices here and I can weld this together. To create the blade itself, I'll just also move this row into 0Y where it belongs. And again, grab all my vertices and a very quick weld. And we now have a blade on this thing. With that done, I can go into these edges here. And I'll just push this back a little bit. And remove that which I don't need. And I now have my curvature back in here. I'll go back into my cut tool and I'll run along the top lip this time. Again, trying to pair off these vertices and create the little bevel that exists on the outside of the blade. So something a little bit like that. I'll then again go in and connect these things so that I have a little bit cleaner geometry. Next, I'll go and place the holes. Now, the holes are not on center here. You can see that they're off based off where my geometry is. Now, this does look to be lined up pretty close with the central point of this this gem here that lies on the axe. And so my assumption is that these are just drawn a little off-center where they should be. It's not the end of the world. We can correct that. First, I'm going to create some cylinders that are going to be stand-ins for my holes. And I want to get the topology of these things right, so that I end up with the right number of segments here. Go away. So that I can clean this up as best I can. So we'll get rid of the height segments like so. 18 is going to be too high. I'm going to bring this down to 12. Convert that to an editable poly in my front view. I'm just going to hold shift and bring a second one out here. And this one I'll scale down in Y and X in order to match the second hole. I'll find out where these things are supposed to be in height. This is the Z-axis, which I'll copy. And then I can go into each of these things and just paste that Z-axis back in. Like so. Alright. With those in place, I'll attach them together, and these are essentially going to be the holes. In order to make them holes, we'll delete the caps. And we'll invert all the polygons. We can even delete everything below the center line, which will be recreated using symmetry. Next, I'll take the large n-gon here, and I'll just extrude it in order to create our little bevel. I'll bring this in. I'm going to bring it in about that. Like so. Next, I'll go and adjust these guys as I place those in the wrong place, or I place them more accurately where they were originally. So here I can go and add them there. I'm going to go to my polygons here, and I'm actually going to go and delete this large n-gon that won't be needed. I'll then attach the cylinders that are making up my holes, and I can begin pairing these things off. So if I do two edges from this one and the two edges from this one, I can bridge them, and that'll bridge them along that center line. I'll grab these two on the left-hand side and the two over here and bridge those, continuing that flat edge straight across. And then I'll take this one and this one. We'll bridge that, followed by shift and dragging that one out. Now there actually is an edge here, so maybe what I'll do instead of bridging, or instead of extruding, is I'll bridge that just to here. Now there's a great deal of geometry inside the blade of the axe, which is going to need to be cleaned up at some point. I'm also going to make sure here that everything is going the right way. I'll try that again. I had the wrong edge selected. Alright, so something like this. I'll bridge again. And now I can go and grab this open hole and cap it. And this open hole and cap it. And now, just a matter of, and I'll do this in isolation mode so you can see it a little bit better. I'm just going to go and quad off each of these polygons here where they are no longer needed. So something like that. I'll grab the top of this one and the top of this one. And I can go out there. This one can go, I guess it's going to go over here. I'll bring this up there as well. I'm just going to double check that there are no n-gons on this mesh. And there are not. Which is good. I still need to do something about the fact that there's a tremendous amount of geometry here hidden inside the axe. This might be as simple as just moving this row of vertices inside the blade slightly. And deleting this row. Or more accurately, let's go line these up in X. X. Copy the X position and move all of these to that same position, like so. And then I'll just run a weld here. So just bring up my tolerance a little bit till they snap. Okay. So now there's less geometry here hidden inside of this thing, which is a little bit better. And we're looking like we're just about done with this portion, shy of the symmetry. So I'll place a symmetry modifier on here and add my my flip to flip it around to the other side. We'll go down to Y and we'll mirror this down to the bottom, and we'll symmetry again to Z. Now you'll notice that the X, Y, and Z here are all screwed up, and that's because this thing needs to have its transforms reset, which I can do. I'll need to clean it up now by removing all of the extra edges created by symmetry. Those are not contributing to the shape of this mesh, so they are unneeded. I'm going to double click each one of these edges along with Control to add them to my selection, and then Control backspace to remove them. And I'll run the same thing here on the bottom, again removing the additional edge created by symmetry. Something a little bit more like that. And now we can go and adjust our smoothing groups. So I'm just going to run a auto smooth on this thing. And then we're going to go have a look at how well that cleaned it up. So not bad. It did require a little bit more work on these bevels. I don't like the smoothing that's happening here between them and the blade. So we'll just go and select them. Each side of the blade here. And I'll auto smooth them on their own, giving them their own smoothing groups. Looks pretty good. The next thing I need to do, and the final thing here I need to do on the axe blade, is to go and place this little chip in here. So I'm going to start in the front. I'll go and grab the cut tool, and I'll just start on the edge here. And I'll kind of make this W pattern here. You can see I'm a little bit off, but I'm kind of still reproducing that shape. I'm going to switch over to the back view, and I'm going to isolate my geometry again. And here I can go and cut. I'll start with the vertices and line them up fairly close, and then join them like that. I'll target weld. Just to clean those up a little bit. And then I can go and remove this vertice. Then in my front view, I'm going to connect the pairs of vertices together, which will give me polygons where that edge should be. I'm going to smoothing group these, so we'll auto smooth, giving them each their own smoothing group. And then from the front, this requires a level of cleanup. So I'm going to grab alternating vertices here from the cut portion of the blade down into the end of the bevel here and connect them together. Just to ensure that I have a quad. This is a quad here, but it's concave, and I don't like that. And so I'm going to add another edge here just to triangulate that. And so quad, triangle, another triangle here, another triangle there, another quad, and another triangle. So we're now nice and clean. I'm going to make sure there's no artifacting from the fact that those edges have been connected as such. And no, it looks pretty smooth. I can see a little bit of artifacting here on this one, but I think it's manageable. And there is the blade portion of this thing. Next, I'll go in and start the Celtic knot. For the Celtic knot, I'm going to use a line again, and this time I'm going to follow the shape of the Celtic knot from point A to point B. Whoops, let me try this again. So again, I'm going to use a line, bring it in. And where I'm clicking here essentially is in each angle, each direction change, if you will. So every time the Celtic knot changes directions, I'm going to go swift it around. And then I'm also clicking to jump over the gaps here in between where there's a hole. And then down here, and then here, here. Every now and then, I also click and drag, which is a shame because that ends up creating a Bezier corner for me unintentionally. You can see it here denoted by this little green set of tangent handles. So I'm just going to go and set these all to be corners. I don't need any other shape here. You'll also notice that I only did half of this thing, and that's because the shape is actually pretty symmetrical. So as long as I do one half, the other half should work out quite nicely. The catch is that I need to actually make it symmetrical. So you'll notice where the hole is and where the halfway point of this thing is, which are off a little bit at this point. So I'm going to go move this thing up a little bit, and we'll be nice to put this right on that edge. So if I find out where that edge is using my height information from here, I can copy that and then return back to the spline and that point and paste that back in. So that appears to be a completely symmetrical version of this thing. So we'll try putting a symmetry on this, and we'll symmetry it in Z, and you'll notice that no matter what you do, symmetry does not work with splines. Well, the reason for that is symmetry is meant for geometry, not for splines, and so we're going to have an issue here. What we do need to do is we need to use the mirror tool. And the mirror tool will allow us to create a duplicate of this. So here I'll go and flip it this way, and I'll make sure that it's a copy, and I'll say OK. And then I'm just going to adjust its pivot point using snaps onto that vert. And I'm using that vertice because we know exactly where it's supposed to go. So this thing is now symmetrical. So if I attach the other spline to it, select all the vertices on this mesh and do a weld, I can then remove the vertex in the middle, this one. And this thing is now perfectly symmetrical. Now what I need to do is remove the components I don't need. So this, I'm going to go to the segment selection here. And this one doesn't need to be here. So I'm kind of starting at the beginning point again over here. So I'm going to go to the segment, select it, and delete. And then I'll follow this through. There's another segment here that doesn't need to be there. This one doesn't need to be there. This will continue in through here. And I can delete that one. And now I've got a point here where I actually do need a few more points. So I'll use refine. And I'll put a couple of points in here, followed by grabbing that segment and deleting. Again, I'll follow the curve all the way through. I have another set of refinement points that need adding. I think that one will be fine there. I'll add one here, which I'll select and delete. And then this one can go away. It would appear that I missed the mark a little bit with this vertex, so I'm going to try and move it down a little bit. Or better yet, I'll just hit refine in the right place and delete the vertex I don't need. Again, I'm going to refine a little bit over here, and I'll add a couple more points. Again, allowing me to select the segment I don't need and delete it. Follow this through. There's another segment here, which is also going to need a refinement point. There. And delete. That should give me enough segments all the way through here in order to create this shape a little bit more accurately. Now, to create the shape, I'm going to go into rendering, and we're going to enable this in the viewport. I'm going to ensure that I'm on rectangular, and I'll bring up the width until this is a little bit more accurate. Now, again, you'll notice that there is some overlap and some kind of ugliness happening here. I can either go and adjust the shape of the spline in order to correct this, which would mean moving quite a few points around. Or I can go into my... Let's start by doing this. Or I can go into the polygons. I can convert this down and move it up. And then adjust that there. So I'm going to move these points up to Y. Let's see, 2.16. And I'll move these ones down to as close to the same number as I can. Close enough. And so you can see this is going to give me a little bit of a messy shape. But it's not too bad. A little bit of reorientation here. And I can clean this up without too much effort. So again, I just want to make sure that they don't interfere with each other, as they're likely to do when you don't get these shapes right. Okay, that looks better. The next thing I'll do is bring this out away from the center line, and I'll convert it to an editable polygon. Next, we need to clean this up. So from the top, I'm going to select the back half of this and Alt-select the front and delete it. And then I'll do the same thing here again, grabbing just the front. And I'm going to go add the little bevel that's in here. So to do this, I'm going to add an inset. Bring this in and say OK, and then an extrusion to bring this back in a little bit like this. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when you create geometry from a spline, often you'll end up with a triangulated edge at one end of your spline. This is just Max's default. Because this geometry was created rectangularly or box-shaped, I'm not too concerned about the triangulation because it's only triangulating just a quad. If I was going to be making this into a super high poly mesh, I would need to remove this to turbo smooth it. But since I'm not going to be doing that level of detail with these meshes, I can just leave that as is. There is an other issue here, which is going to be more prevalent when I unhide the axe or bring the rendering mode back here. And that's that these things go through one another. Again, this is just based off the fact that the symmetry on this thing is not accurate, and that the shapes are kind of misaligned a little bit. So in order to clean this up, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to scale it down a little bit and just move it back into place again. Again, because its pivot point is along that line, scaling it down is going to make it line up a little bit more accurately. Next, I'll remove the end caps here. In fact, I should make sure that they are inside enough that we can't see them. And then I can delete them. I'll affect my pivot point. And we'll go and move it to 0 in X, followed by symmetry and another symmetry. So I'm going to adjust the pivot point here again and add it to 0 in Y so that the symmetry on both sides here works. So let's delete these symmetries and reset my X form just so that this works the right way. So we want to go X, and then we want to go symmetry again in Z. No, not in Z, in Y. And then I'll flip this one. There we go. Convert that to an editable poly. And now I'll just attach them together And we've got that detail. Next, I'll go and do the little filigree area here. So for that, I'm going to need to add transparency mode or X-ray mode here to the handle, since this piece appears on the handle. I'm going to go and just try to align this a little bit better with the actual gem that I've modeled, like so, just so the modeling is a little bit more accurate. And then again, I'm going to start this off with a line now instead of going through and doing a line like I did a moment ago. This one is actually going to need to be traced out. Now, the reason for that is that on this mesh, in a couple of places, we have a junction or a T-junction here where the spline would split. And so it's not going to give me the as easy a time going through and doing this. So I'm just going to go and trace these out. Now, I'm not going to go and spend a tremendous amount of time doing this. I just need to get kind of close enough to the shape that it reads once it's been extruded in order to give me the right shape. Now, again, I'm going a little hastily here, so it's every now and then dragging a vertice out on me. That's all right. Again, it's a really easy fix. All I'm going to do afterwards is go in and set all of these vertices. Each one of these things is going to be a corner. And when I do that, all of this rounding will disappear. And so I'm not entirely concerned about that. So around here we go, down this way a bit, and this way. Now I'm trying to take a great deal of care in where I place my vertices, ensuring that I end up with vertex buddies here along the way. Meaning I want to make sure that for every one on the top, I end up with one on the bottom. Now this is not always going to be something that's doable. You know, I still need to adhere to the shape of this component, but wherever I can, I try to do that. And when I do, I'll end up with an easier time cleaning this up afterward. And so there is now the third piece. And just like that, I'm mostly done. Again, this appears to me to be something that is symmetrical. And so that makes my life a little bit easier because, again, I'll need only create half of it. And then from that half, we'll go and create the other half. So there's piece number 4. The next component I'm going to make is going to run around the gem itself. Now here, I'm going to need to pay a little bit close attention to the actual gem that I've modeled as well as the reference image. I need a little bit of both. I'm going to go past the center line here and back up. Something like that. And then again, back up again. All right, 4 more, and these ones are pretty easy. There's a rectangular piece here, and a rectangular piece here. And then these 2 little triangular pieces that fill up these gaps, both of which only have a couple of vertices on them. Now again, with each vertex that I make, I'm adding to the complexity of the shape, and it is going to end up getting quite a bit higher poly than something you would actually get in a game. In fact, this is going to be exacerbated when we do the braided rope. We're going to model all of that. And again, that is a ridiculous amount of topology to place on a game resolution object. But since this is not meant to be a tutorial for modeling an asset for a game, but more about the modeling itself, we're going to be okay with getting that detail in here. So I'm just going and moving out my my little spline here. Excuse me. I want to ensure that I line it up accurately. I'm going to place it about there. It's not too deep inside the mesh. Again, I'll place an extrude modifier on this. And I'll pull that extrude back until I get the right level of detail on this. I'll convert this to an editable poly. Actually, before I do this, let's clean up all of those vertices that were dragged in my haste. So you'll notice there's a lot of green tangent handles here. I'm just going to right click and make sure they're all set to corner. And now, not a green one to be seen. Go back to the extrude, and we should be quite a bit lower poly now. So I'm going to convert this to an editable polygon, and I'm going to grab its pivot point, and just to make my life simpler, I'm going to place it on the center of the gem, and then zero out the Y, giving me now a perfect centered position here. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to clean this up. So again, there are polygons inside this object that need not be there. Those can be removed. There are polygons on the front that are both concave, and also giant n-gons, which all need to be cleaned up as well. I'm going to try and use the turn to poly modifier to clean this up. Now, turn to poly modifier doesn't always do the best job here when cleaning things. And so after I place this on, I do want to go have a look at it and just ensure that it is not creating any really bizarre pieces of geo. And it looks like in this instance, it did not. Everything's pretty nice and clean. There's a few places where, you know, I might have placed my edge here, you know, not needing to place this one there. And, you know, clean this up as well. But that's, you know, the least of my concerns is only just a little bit of this. And so I'll clean up what I need to. Everything else looks pretty decent. Because my pivot point's in the right place, I also need only apply symmetry in Z, Y, until I reset the X form on this. So I'm going to do that, convert it to an editable poly. I'm going to remove my symmetry lines here, which are not needed. And then I'll place a symmetry again, this time in Z, to give me the back of this thing. I'll grab my handle and attach that. All right. So now I've got just about everything done on this. The only thing needs doing are the rope and then this little funky shape here. So I'm going to start with the rope, and I'm going to choose to do that on this side only because it's a little easier to select my edges because the cut in the blade is not here. So I'm going to select all the edges around where I want the rope to go. From this, I'll create a shape, and I'm going to leave that shape exactly where it is. So I now have a spline that's hidden in here, right there. And what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to create a rope that is going to then follow this spline. In fact, I'm going to recreate that spline again, and I'm going to make sure that I make it linear and not smooth, like so. So now, it would be nice to find out how much I need in terms of the distance here, how much rope I need. So I'm going to go measure one of these points. I'll turn my snaps on here. Whoa. And create a tape. And I'm going to go from one point to another. So this gives me a total length of 17 units. So the way that that's useful is going to be, again, by measuring how many of these edges I actually need. So if I go back into my edges here, and I go in, again, check all the way around this thing, I believe there end up being 34 edges. There we are, 34. Now, the edge that I selected to measure is not the longest edge, nor is it the shortest edge, so I'm going to kind of average that out. And what I'll do is I'll bring up my calculator, and what we'll do is we'll take our 34 edges and multiply them by 17 units in length, giving us 578. So that's how long I'm going to need to make my rope. Now, if you're not using the exact same scale I am, you are not going to be able to just punch this number in, and you'll have to measure it for yourself. And so you'll need to do that. So, now that I've got that done, the next thing I'm going to need to do is make the rope. So, I've got my measurement here. I'm going to go and create a cylinder. And in the top view, I'm going to go and create it about thusly. We'll go in, let's see, first I'll reduce the number of sides here. I'm going to bring this down to 6. The height is our 581 or whatever it was. Again, I'm not too concerned about that being incredibly accurate. I'm going to bring this number down. Maybe something like that. I'll convert this to an editable poly. And I'm just going to double check here looking at this thing that it has given me about the right height. I'm going to delete the caps off this thing and start to give it some more segments here. Now, this is where I was saying we are going to be getting away from what you would actually place into a game. So the issue is that we want to learn how to make this kind of detail, though that kind of detail would appear as a texture and not as modeling. But we're going to do it as modeling here. So the first thing I'm going to do, there's only one polygon that runs the entire length of this thing. So I'm going to add some connections to this. And I'm going to bring those connections up until we get somewhere near square polygons. Now, I clicked and dragged, and you can see that gave Max a little bit of a stroke as it tried to keep up with what I was doing. And it's because this is a fairly expensive procedure to do things that way, which would be a little bit easier on the system here if I just go and type in some values. So I'll double click in here. I'm going to type in 200, and I'll hit OK. And that'll accept those. And then I'm just going to ring and loop all of these vertical edges, and I'm going to connect again. Now, this is going to try and put another 200 edges in each of these sections, which is just a silly number of polygons. It's going to be absolutely absurdly high poly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this number down. First, I need to wait for Max to respond once again. And once it does, I'll zero this number. Now, before it does, we're going to end up with just polygons absolutely everywhere, edges just absolutely everywhere. So essentially, between each of these white edges, we are going to see 200 individual new edges created. Now, if you factor in the fact that this is already 200 edges tall, we are going to end up with something that's about 200,000 polys. So reducing this number is going to be kind of important. Now there is a way that I could have actually saved Max's performance in doing this, which would have been to reset this number using another mesh, or using another area here. So maybe if I just connected one of these things, it would have performed a little bit better. We'll wait to see if Max comes back. If not, what I can do is force close this, and then I'll open up the AutoBack file. Okay, so I did manage to open up my AutoBack here. I paused the recording while I was doing and got my model right back to where I was again. So again, I'm going to go hit the connect options here. Again, you can see that it performs much better with a lower number in here. So I don't want to bring that number too insanely high. I'm going to bring it up to about 4 and give me something a little bit like this. Now again, I need to make 2 ropes twisted around each other. So I'm just going to hold shift here. And we'll go and make a duplicate of this. I'll get them fairly close to each other. And then I'll attach them to one another. And then I'll just delete the 2,000 polygons that exist in between the two. I'll grab the 4,004 vertices in between and weld them. Followed by cleaning up my smoother groups. Like so. So that these do indeed look like... There we go. These do indeed look like 2 pieces of rope. Now you can see the auto smooth here did not do a good job on that second piece of rope, and that's because the angles here are are not within the tolerance of the auto smooth. And so I'll double check again, and that looks better. Okay, the next step that I'm going to need to do is select the spline, select the rope, and I'm going to isolate them. I'm going to, in my top view, reposition my pivot point into the center here somewhere. That way, when I place the twist modifier on this thing, we can actually twist these together. And I'll try and zoom in on this so you can see it. In a way that'll actually twist both pieces together. So something like that. It's starting to give me the appearance of it being a twisted piece of rope. Now I'm doing a multiple of 360 degrees so that I can weld the ends together once I'm done. I'm going to convert this to an edible poly. Now it does appear to have kind of flattened in on itself. Again, I'm going to end up using the push modifier to correct this. Now this spline, it would appear I did not get the entirety of it. So I'm going to go back to this thing and back to its edges and ensure that I get the entirety of this thing. So again, I'm going to create a new shape from selection, make sure it's linear. And now we'll go select our linear shape and a rope, and I'll isolate these two. So the first thing that I want to do is reset the transforms on both of these objects to allow this next procedure to work correctly. And then I'm going to go use the path to form modifier. I'll pick my path, and I'll move the object to the path. This should give me the rope following the contours of the spline, and thusly following the contours of the blade. Now, somewhere in here is an opening, which will coincide with the position of one of the vertices here. If I use the stretch and drag this down a little bit, there it is there. So I'm going to try to put the number back up here, and you can see, there's the opening, that we're off by about 2 full twists. Now this is the estimate of length that did this. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring these numbers down and back up until I can get them to a point where we're pretty much fused together. So something like that. I don't think I'm going to get much closer than that. They're connected at one end and not at the other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge this down, collapse 2. I'll grab those 2 borders and I'm going to bridge them, followed by the removal of just one of the edges. This will give me now the entirety of this rope done correctly. Now, as I mentioned, it looks a little deflated and kind of like twirly pasta. So I'm going to go use the push modifier just to go and inflate this thing back up a little bit. Try and make it look like that braided rope again. Now, in doing this, this thing is, as I mentioned, far too high poly for a game. But again, we're using this model as a means of learning to model and not learning to particularly make an asset for a game. And so there you have the twirly rope kind of going all the way around. Its pivot point is still in the right place, and so I need only just apply a symmetry modifier to put it on the other side. I should also remember to remove my shape. Now this was the spline used to create this thing, and it's not needed either. Finally, the last component that I need to do is going to be this little funny shape here. Now to do this, I'm actually going to move this thing out of the way a little bit. That'll make modeling it a little bit easier. And again, I'm going to go create a spline that is going to help me create this shape. This spline is going to live on the inside of the bevel here for the blade. So I'm going to go select it all the way down. And I don't really need to worry about the length of this thing. It's going to kind of make itself. So here we'll create another shape. We'll make this linear as well. I'm going to go and select said shape. And I'll select my reference plane and isolate the 2 of them. I'll begin by creating the detail here that's going to be reproduced. And I'm going to do this with a simple plane. In edge mode on my simple plane, I'm going to extrude several times in order to get edges where they belong on the detail. Something like that. I'm going to grab this and bring it up to about where the halfway point is, because we're going to get a duplicate there. And then I'll grab these two and we'll drag them out. I'll turn my rotate snaps on and rotate these 90 degrees, where I'll go and place them in the right place. Should probably make sure that each of these things is lined up accurately in X. Next, I'll go and connect, and I'll bring those two out, and I'll add another connection set here and curve these ones. And now I'm kind of getting that shape a little bit more. The next thing I'm going to do is add some more connections along the height of this. Now these connections are going to help it curve once I get it assigned to a spline. Next, I'll grab this vertex and I'll add a symmetry modifier, which will do the Y, convert that to an editable poly. We'll remove the center edge. Next, I'll grab my pivot point with snaps turned on, place it on a vertex, and then holding Shift, cancel, try that again. Holding Shift, I'll drag a copy up here. Now there are 14 of these things on this shape, so I'll just make 13 and hit OK. And there are all 13. I'll turn my snaps off and just move this aside. Next, I'm going to go and attach them all together. Now you can attach one by one by one by clicking like this, or use the attach options and go through all of these. I know plane 1 is my reference plane, so we won't attach that. That should give me just these shapes. I'll grab my borders, Control, grab my vertices and weld them, cleaning up the little mishaps that happen in between. And then in order to get our curvature correct when we place this on the mesh, I will again snap my pivot point, this time to the inside. So now I'll reset the X form on both of these pieces, the spline and the geo. I'll grab the geo, and again we're going to use the path to form world space modifier. There's my path, and I'll move it to the path. And again, we're going to see that there's a little bit of a discrepancy in size. So here I'm just going to use the stretch to go and squish this guy in. Now this is actually going to deform this mesh a little bit using the stretch. And what's happening is some of the geo is gone and started to clutter over. So if I bring the stretch back to 1, it'll be a little bit cleaner, but no, not so much. But we don't have all the shapes in here anyway. So what we're going to do is bring this in so that we do have all the shapes. I'll convert this to an editable poly, and I'm going to go clean up a little bit of the ugliness here that's happened by just removing some of these edges and readjusting some of the vertex positions on any vertex that seems misaligned, of which there are going to be many. So something like that. I'll go down here. Again, there's a couple here that can be cleaned up. And do the top. Now, one way you could avoid having to do all this cleanup would have been to actually just create that shape in the shape that it's supposed to have. Though I find that would be a lot more work than actually creating this in this way. So that's not too bad. There's only just a couple of these things that need cleaning. And once I've got them all, here's another instance of the shape itself being misaligned. Again, it just tried to conform itself to the curvature that was there, which just broke it a little bit. And this happens on occasion. Again, this was a pretty low poly shape to kind of force into that shape. But just doing this will clean it up. And I'll move back around over here. Let's see, we'll remove this one. I could probably do away with this one. And we look to be good. So next, what I'll do is select all of the polygons. and I'm going to go and extrude them. Something about like that. My pivot point is already in the right place, so we can start adding our symmetries. X and 1 and Y, which I'll flip, will give me the back side. Convert to an editable poly. I'll grab the handle and attach the whole thing. So now, I'm going to go delete my reference plane, and we now have the axe now completely done, which looks a little something like this. Again, I didn't bother with the little faces here. Once you know how to do this little filigree detail that's here, you're more than welcome to go and place the faces on these things. So that's it. That's the entirety of the axe. Done and done. And so, yeah, good luck on this, and I'll see you on grading day. Take care.